Hey, how is it going, everybody? My name is Stevie Wonderkid and welcome back to another GTA 5 car replica build. In this video, we're going to be recreating Paul Walker or Brian O'Connor's Nissan Skyline R34 GTR that appeared in the intro race of Too Fast, 2 Furious. And to recreate this car, we're going to be using the Elegy Retro Custom, which is a Benny's vehicle. Now, to get the Elegy Retro Custom in the first place, you're first going to want to buy a normal Elegy RH8 off of either the Legendary Motorsport or Benny's website, and then you're going to want to take it over to Benny's workshop to do the upgrade. Now, quick cost breakdown for this build. First off, the Elegy Retro Custom upgrade will cost $904,000, and after all of the visual modifications for this replica build, the total cost will be around $1.3 million. And then if you include all of the other upgrades like armor, brakes, engine, transmission, and turbo, the total final cost will be around $1.5 million. So hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of how much money you're going to need for this build. So with that all out of the way, let's now head over to Benny's and get started with this build. Alright guys, so now we're finally in Benny's and it's time to start going through all of the visual upgrades you guys are going to need for this replica build. And I really quickly want to keep in mind that I'm going to be skipping over the armor and the other performance upgrades. Really, that's down to you and what you have unlocked. I'm only going to be covering the visual upgrades. So with that being said, we're going to start things off in the bumper section. Moving into the front bumpers, we went with the painted extended splinter on the front bumper here. Next up, for the rear bumpers, we went with the stock rear bumper. Next up, for the bumper accessories, in the bumper meshes up front here, we just removed the bumper mesh. Next up, for the intercoolers, we went with the intercooler with water sprayer. Moving back out here into the chassis. For the headlight trim, we went with no headlight trim on this build, we just left it off. Next up, for the doors, we went with the stock doors, there are no deflectors or anything. Next up, for the fenders, we just left the fenders themselves entirely stock. And then moving back out into the engine. For the engine block, we went with the primary color valve covers, as you guys can see. Next up, for the cam cover, we went with the primary color cam belt cover. Next up, for the strut brace, we went with the polished strut brace. Moving on to the exhaust. For the exhaust, we went with the big bore exhaust, as you guys can see here. Next up, going into the grille, we went with the stock grille. Next up, for the hood, going into hood accessories, there are no hood accessories for this build. And then the hood itself is also entirely stock. Backing out of here, next up is the interior. First thing is the trim, and for the trim design, we just left the trim design entirely stock. There is no sun strip for this build. Next up is the trim color, and for the trim color we went with a racing blue, as you guys can see here on the seats and the door panels. Moving on to the dash itself is entirely stock. And then next up are the dials, and for the dials we went with the pod tacho and the dash gauges. Next up, for the doors, we did not change the door cards, we just left these entirely stock, as you can see. Next up, for the seats, we went with the carbon track seats. And next up, for the steering wheels, we went with the Apex Clubman steering wheel. Moving on to the light color, we chose a ultra blue for the light color. Next up, for the roll cage, we have the street half cage, as you guys can see in the rear here. Moving back out, the next thing is the lights. So for the headlights, we just left the headlights themselves entirely stock. Next up, for the neon kits, for the neon layout, we chose a neon layout of the front, back, and sides. and then the neon color itself is an electric blue. Moving on. Next up, we have the iconic aspect of this build, the Midnight Racer livery, of course. Next up, we have plates, and for the plate holder up front, we just removed the front plate, as you guys can see. Next up, for the license plate in the rear, we went with the blue on white 1 plate, and obviously the picture of the actual real life license plate is on the screen in case you guys would like to recreate that. Next up, we have the respray color. So for the primary color, we moved into the metallic section, and then we went with a metallic silver. Now, because this is a metallic paint, you do have the option to do the pearlescent, but we actually did not change the pearlescent color. It should be ice white by default. I would not change the pearlescent. Next up, for the secondary color, again, we matched this to the primary, so we went metallic, and then just did a metallic silver. Moving on to the trim color, we covered this back in the interior section, but as you guys can see, again, we went with the racing blue, and you can see that on both the door panels and the seats. Moving back out, the next aspect is the roof. So for the roof accessories, there are no roof accessories for this build. Next up, for the roof itself, the roof is entirely stock. Moving back out, next up we have the skirts, and for this we went with the drift skirts. Moving back out, we have the spoiler here, and for the spoiler we just went with the Extreme Downforce BGW spoiler. Next up, we have the suspension, because I consider this to be a visual upgrade, and for this, we just left the suspension stock. Next up, we have the wheels, and for the wheels, we went into a wheel type, and then we chose the sports wheels, we went into chrome rims, and then we chose the Endo V.2 rims, as you guys can see here. Moving back out, for the wheel color, obviously because these wheels are chrome, you cannot change the color. Then moving into the tires, for the tire design, we just left the tires themselves stock. There are no custom tires. The tire enhancements, that's up to you. And then the tire smoke is just the default white tire smoke. Then moving back out, and last but not least, we have the windows. And for the window tints, we actually did not do any tints for this build. And that will wrap up all of the modifications necessary for recreating Paul Walker's iconic Too Fast, Too Furious Nissan Skyline R34 GTR. Now, if this video ended up being helpful and informative for you, feel free to drop a like on the video and leave any feedback or suggestions for future replica builds down in the comments. And also consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because I plan on releasing more replica builds and other GTA 5 car related content very soon. But with that out of the way, have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next video.